The desert wind carried a memory of blood that night, and Marc Spector could taste it on his tongue as he crouched behind a crumbling pillar deep within a forgotten temple. Torchlight flickered across sandstone walls carved with the face of Set, the devourer, the god of storms and betrayal. Below him, 17 robed figures moved in slow circles around an altar, their chants weaving a language older than any written tongue. At the center of their ritual rested an artifact he had been hunting for months. A curved blade of black glass veined with silver, humming with a power that made the air itself tremble. Khonshu stood beside him, invisible to all but his chosen servant, the bone-white skull of the moon god tilted in patient hunger. "The eclipse is beginning," the god whispered, and his voice was the sound of tombs opening. "Stop them, Marc. Break their circle before the doorway forms." Moon Knight moved. He descended from the shadows like a falling star wrapped in white linen, crescent blades flashing as he struck the first cultist across the throat. The chanting shattered into screams. He fought without hesitation, without mercy, his body a weapon shaped by Khonshu's will and hardened by years of penance. But the ritual had already reached its final syllable. The obsidian blade rose on its own, spinning above the altar, and the air behind it tore open like wet parchment. A wound in reality bloomed before him, deeper than any ocean, older than any sky. Marc lunged for the artifact, determined to shatter it before the passage stabilized. Khonshu roared a warning that came too late. The rift pulled at him, hungry and vast, and though he drove his blade into the stone floor to anchor himself, the ancient magic recognized a servant of divinity and claimed him as tribute. Khonshu's final words followed him into the void. "The night belongs to no monster." Marc fell through darkness that had weight, through voices that were not voices, through centuries measured in heartbeats. When he struck the ground again, the impact drove the breath from his lungs. Rain. Cold rain, thick with the smell of oil and iron and something faintly rotten. He rose slowly in a narrow alley slick with black water, his white cloak clinging to his shoulders. Above him, between two towers of glass and concrete, hung the moon he did not recognize. It was full, and it was red, and it watched him the way a wolf watches a wounded deer. Something was wrong with this city. He could feel it in his teeth. The shadows here were not empty. They breathed. They waited. A scream cut through the rain from 3 streets over. Marc did not think. He ran. He arrived at a plaza where 4 figures in long coats had cornered a family against a shuttered storefront. Their eyes glowed the color of frozen mercury, and when they turned toward him, their mouths opened to reveal teeth designed for a purpose older than civilization. Not demons, Marc realized. Not gods. Predators. Something in between. They came at him in a blur of unnatural speed, and Marc met them with silver crescents and divine reflex. His body absorbed impacts that should have shattered bone. Wounds closed before they could bleed. The vampires, for that was surely what they were, hissed in confusion as their fangs found nothing but healing flesh. He broke 3 of them across the wet pavement in under a minute. The 4th fled into the dark, leaving only ash and the whimpering of the rescued family behind. High above, on the ledge of a cathedral spire, a woman in black leather watched him with pale, ancient eyes. Selene had studied every supernatural force walking the earth for 6 centuries. She had cataloged gods, demons, hybrids, and horrors. She had never seen anything like the white ghost below. Elsewhere, in a mahogany chamber lit by candles older than nations, the Vampire Elder Council received their first frantic report. A stranger, a phantom in crescent silver, speaking to someone no one else could see. Marc rose in the rain, and Khonshu's whisper found him even here. "The hunt, my servant, has only just begun." The city revealed itself slowly, the way wounded animals do. Marc spent 3 nights walking its avenues, learning its rhythms, cataloging the places where the shadows seemed too deep, and the alleys where the pavement had been scrubbed too clean. Stephen Grant, the gentler soul who shared his mind, cataloged each detail with quiet fascination, whispering observations about Gothic architecture and forgotten heraldry carved above certain doorways. Jake Lockley, the 3rd and most dangerous of them, noted exits, sightlines, and the particular scent of gun oil beneath expensive cologne. Between them stood Marc, and Marc listened to all 3. He learned that this world had 2 hidden nations. The vampires ruled from marble halls beneath the financial district, feeding with careful discipline upon a population that never suspected the taxes it paid served monsters. The Lycans, once slaves and now insurgents, hunted from the wet outskirts, their rage refined by centuries into something colder than hatred. Both sides claimed to be defending humanity. Both sides used humanity as currency. Marc found a warehouse where trafficked civilians had been prepared as bloodstock. Their memories chemically dulled. He burned it to the foundations. 2 nights later, he uncovered a laboratory where Lycan scientists were splicing human infants with wolf genome in search of a purer strain. He shut it down without killing the researchers, though Khonshu screamed for their throats. Mercy, Marc told the god, is also a weapon. Khonshu did not agree, but Khonshu did not leave. Selene followed him from a careful distance. She had been sent to observe, to measure, and if necessary, to eliminate. What she saw confused her. This white-armored stranger did not kill for pleasure, did not kill for gold, did not kill for either bloodline. He killed only when killing was the last honest option, and even then, he grieved it. She watched him kneel beside a dying human girl in a rail yard and speak to her softly until her breathing stopped. She watched him rise afterward and stand in the rain for a long time, as though the weight of that small death were heavier than any army. She had expected another mercenary. She had found a mourner. Elsewhere, Lucian read the reports from his lieutenants and understood immediately what most of his kind had missed. A third power had entered the board. Not human, not vampire, not Lycan. Something older, something that answered to a name none of his scholars could translate. He sent an envoy under a flag of parley, a young Lycan named Rael who carried an offer of alliance written on parchment sealed with silver wax. The Vampire Council responded differently. They summoned Selene and gave her a command carved into ancient obsidian. Eliminate the outsider. Do not negotiate. Do not question. Return with proof of his death before the next new moon. Selene bowed. Selene said nothing. Selene walked out into the rain and did not obey. Marc met the Lycan envoy in an abandoned church whose bells had rusted into silence. Rael offered him a place at Lucian's side, wealth, weapons, and the eternal gratitude of a wronged people. Marc listened patiently, then declined. I am not here to help you win, he said. I am here to end the thing that made this war possible. That night, alone on the roof of a derelict opera house, Marc allowed his 3 selves to speak openly for the first time since arriving. Stephen pleaded for restraint, for study, for understanding. Jake demanded blood, arguing that this city would only respect force. Marc stood between them like a man balancing on a knife's edge. Khonshu paced behind him, tall and hungering, insisting that every predator below deserved judgment. I will not be your executioner, Marc told the god. Not here, not for this. Then be my witness, Khonshu answered, and his voice was almost gentle. Bear witness to what these creatures have done, and when the moment comes, choose. Selene stepped from the shadows behind him. She had followed him even here. She did not raise a weapon. She raised, instead, a question. Why do you refuse both sides? Marc turned toward her, rain sliding from the crescent points of his hood, and gave the only answer his fractured heart still trusted. Because both sides forgot they were once something worth saving. Somewhere far below the city, in a chamber sealed for 1,000 years, ancient chains began to rattle. The catacombs beneath the old cathedral had not been walked by living feet in 900 years. Selene led Marc through passages that predated the vampire covens, predated even the earliest Lycan pack laws, tunnels carved by hands that belonged to neither race. She carried a lantern of pale blue flame that did not flicker, and the light it shed made every carving on the walls seem to move. They descended for hours. Stephen, ever the scholar, translated symbols aloud as they passed. Proto-Sumerian. Then something older. Then something that had no name in any surviving tongue. At last they came to a chamber shaped like an inverted crown, its floor inlaid with silver stars, its ceiling painted with a moon that had been rendered so long ago the pigment had turned to dust. Manuscripts waited on a stone table. Selene had known of this place for 200 years, but had never dared enter. She did not tell Marc why. She did not need to. He read the pages by the blue lantern light, and Khonshu read them with him. And for the first time since Marc had known the god, Khonshu was silent. The text spoke of celestial guardians, servants of the moon and sun and stars, appointed by older powers to walk among mortal races and prevent any single species from consuming the others. They spoke of a war that had not yet happened when the words were written, but had already been foreseen. A war between two children of a single wounded mother, night and hunger, hunger and night. And they spoke of a servant of the moon who would arrive when the war had lasted long enough to poison the soil beneath it. A servant who would carry 3 names. A servant who would refuse to choose a side. Marc closed the manuscript slowly. His hands were steady. His breath was not. Khonshu spoke then, and his voice was smaller than Marc had ever heard it. I watched this world for 1,000 years, my servant. I watched it curdle. I could not enter it. The gateway you tore through was not opened by Set's cult. It was opened by me, through them, because I could no longer bear to watch. Marc did not answer immediately. Somewhere above them, the city breathed in its reign. Meanwhile, in a chamber of the Elder Council, a vampire named Amelia unsealed a letter she had hidden for 600 years. It was written in her own hand, in a younger age, when she had still believed her masters honorable. The letter named names. It named crimes. It named a truth she had long ago chosen to forget, that the war between vampires and Lycans had not begun by accident, that the council had engineered its first spark and had fed its every flame since, because a species united cannot be ruled, but a species at war will always beg for a king. She wept once. Then she burned the letter and went to find Selene. Lucian, in his own hidden hall, was reaching the same conclusion by a different path. His most trusted lieutenant had intercepted a coded message between 2 elders, discussing the coming decade's casualty projections, as though they were harvest yields. He read the message twice. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was quiet enough that only the wolves at his feet could hear him. "We were livestock," he said. "All of us, on both sides." Above the city, the red moon was thinning toward its next phase. Something was shifting in the cosmology of the place, as though the stars themselves had noticed a new witness among them. In the chamber of the inverted crown, Selene lowered her lantern and studied the stranger who had upended 6 centuries of her certainty. "You are him," she said. "The one in the pages. The servant with 3 names. Marc did not confirm it. He did not need to. Stephen, within him, was already weeping softly at the beauty of what they had found. Jake was already sharpening plans for what would come. Marc himself stood between them and let both feelings move through him like tides. "The true enemy," he said at last, "is not your bloodline or theirs. It is whoever chose to keep the wound open." Selene met his eyes. For the first time in her long, cold life, she felt something dangerously close to hope. Then, far above them, the earth trembled. The council had already begun their final gambit. The first blood sovereign woke in a vault carved from a single black diamond beneath the oldest elder estate. He had slept for 4,000 years in chains forged from the melted crowns of civilizations that no longer had names. The ritual that woke him required the blood of 13 willing vampires and 13 unwilling Lycans, and the elders provided both without hesitation, believing they had bound the ancient monster to their will. They were wrong. They realized it in the 7 seconds it took him to kill them. He rose from the vault taller than any man should stand, his skin the color of old ivory, his eyes the pale gold of coins pressed onto the mouths of the dead. He did not speak. He walked into the streets, and where his shadow fell, cars stopped, birds died in the air, and mortals dropped to their knees weeping without knowing why. He was the first of them. The origin, the wound from which every vampire and every Lycan had bled outward across the centuries. And he had woken to end what he had begun. Marc, Selene, and Lucian met in a ruined chapel on the north edge of the city. They did not embrace. They did not need to. They stood in a triangle around a map spread on a broken altar, and they planned the impossible. Lucian's remaining pack would evacuate the outer districts. Selene's defectors would seal the tunnels the Sovereign might use to reach the government quarter. Marc would meet the ancient thing where it walked. Khonshu was singing now, not words, not quite. A low resonance beneath Marc's thoughts, a lunar hymn older than any temple. Marc felt the god's power flowing into his crescent blades until they gleamed with a pale silver fire that hurt the eye to look at directly. It was more strength than Khonshu had ever granted him. It was also, Marc understood, a test. He walked into the plaza where the Sovereign had stopped to survey his kingdom. Fires burned in a dozen buildings around them. Bodies littered the fountain steps, drained and discarded. The Sovereign turned as Marc approached, and for the first time in 4,000 years, something like curiosity crossed his ancient face. "You are not of this world," the sovereign said. His voice was the sound of a mountain remembering it had once been a sea. "Return to your own, little moon, and I will let you leave whole." Marc did not answer. He struck. The battle broke the plaza. Stone cracked beneath their feet. Streetlights burst. Selene appeared on a rooftop and rained silver-tipped rounds into the sovereign's back, and the sovereign turned and cast her from the roof with a gesture. Lucian caught her before she hit the ground and set her down with a nod so brief it might have been imagined. Then he transformed, and the great black wolf that had once been a slave in Roman iron hurled himself at the throat of the being who had made his species and cursed it in the same breath. They fought for what felt like an hour and was probably 10 minutes. The sovereign was faster than any of them, stronger than any of them, older than any of them. But he was one, and they were three, and Marc had begun to understand something Khonshu had been trying to teach him for years. "Punish them," Khonshu roared inside his skull. "All of them, every predator, every murderer. This is what I made you for." "No," Marc answered, and the word cost him more than any wound. "I am not only what you made me." He felt Stephen surge forward then, and Jake with him, and for the first time in his splintered life, he did not fight either of them. He let all three of himself stand at once, in the same body, at the same moment. Stephen, the kindness he had almost forgotten. Jake, the fury he had almost feared. Marc, the man who held them both. The crescent blades in his hands flared brighter, and the light they cast was no longer only Khonshu's. It was his own. He drove the blades into the sovereign's chest, not to kill, but to bind. The chains from the vault, dragged there by Lucian's pack, wrapped around the ancient limbs. Selene, bleeding from a dozen wounds, spoke the sealing words she had memorized from the manuscripts below the cathedral. The sovereign's golden eyes widened, then narrowed, then closed. They buried him back into the black diamond vault before dawn. Khonshu was silent for a long time afterward. When he spoke again, his voice held something Marc had never heard in it before. Something that might, in a kinder god, have been called respect. "You chose mercy," the moon god said. "I did not expect that. Perhaps I still have things to learn." Marc knelt in the rubble and, for the first time in years, allowed himself to weep. Dawn came slowly to a city that had forgotten how to welcome it. The rain thinned. The red moon paled into a bruised silver as it retreated below the horizon. Smoke rose from 100 small fires, and the survivors emerged from basements and shelters to look at a skyline that no longer belonged to the powers that had ruled it the day before. The Elder Council was gone. The first blood sovereign had torn through them before Marc and the others had reached him, and what remained of their marble chambers now smelled of ash and old money. The Lycan war councils were leaderless too, most of their generals having fallen in the chaos of the sovereign's brief walk. For the first time in 900 years, neither species had a throne. There were those who wanted Marc to take it. A young vampire delegation came to him on the second morning with an offer written in crimson ink. "Rule us," they said. "You defeated what we could not. The night is yours by right of conquest." Marc read the letter, folded it carefully, and returned it to them unsigned. "I did not come here to be your king," he told them. "I came here to break the crown that made kings possible." Selene stepped forward instead. She did not want the role, and that, Marc thought, was precisely why she deserved it. She gathered the surviving vampire clans and the remnants of Lucian's pack into a single chamber and made them sit at the same table. She did not ask them to forgive one another. She asked them only to remember, honestly and without myth, what had actually happened to them, what the elders had done, what the war had cost, whose blood had actually paid for their long hatreds. Some walked out. Many stayed. Lucian did not stay long. His people needed him, but he too was tired, and Marc could see the weight of centuries beginning to bend his shoulders in a way even Lycan's strength could not resist. Before Lucian left, he came to Marc on a hillside above the ruined plaza and offered him his hand. "I spent 600 years believing I was the wronged one," he said. "I never asked how many of my own choices had wronged others in return. Thank you for the mirror, even if it cut." Marc took his hand. Marc said nothing. Some gratitudes do not require an answer. In the weeks that followed, Marc did quieter work. He helped repair 3 orphanages the sovereign's rampage had damaged. He walked the outer districts at night, not as an executioner now, but as a witness, making sure the small violences that had thrived beneath the greater war did not simply refill the space it had left. He found a hidden sanctuary in the mountains where a handful of humans, vampires and lycans, had already been living together in secret, protected by a mutual promise and a shared fear of the council. He supplied them with food, with weapons for defense only, and with the beginning of a name. The Concord, they called themselves. It was a fragile word. It was also a beginning. Stephen began writing again. Not case notes, not God transcripts, but small observations. The kind of gentle prose he had once written before his life had cracked open. Jake, more quietly than anyone might have expected, took up patrol of the neighborhoods where children still flinched at every shadow. He did not kill anyone. He simply made himself visible. Sometimes that was enough. Khonshu watched all of this from a distance he had not kept before. He did not command. He did not demand. He observed. Marc could feel the God thinking in whatever way gods thought, and could feel something inside that thinking softening in slow, reluctant increments. Peace, Marc understood, was not an event. It was a discipline. It had to be practiced every night, by every hand that had once been raised in violence. It was the hardest work he had ever done. He was not sure, yet, that he wanted to leave it. The full moon came on the 28th night after the sovereign fell, and with it came Khonshu's announcement. The gateway is open again, my servant. The path home has cleared. If you wish to return to your own world, it must be tonight. Marc stood on the roof of the old opera house where he had first spoken openly with all three of himself. The city below him was quieter than it had been in centuries. Not silent. There would never be silence in a place like this, but quieter. A single lit window here. A distant laugh there. The ordinary sounds of ordinary lives trying to remember how to be ordinary. Stephen spoke first, because Stephen usually did when the choice involved leaving. I miss the museum, he said softly. I miss the library. I miss the small flat with the goldfish. I would like to go home. I would like to sleep in a bed that knows my name. Jake spoke second, and Jake, for once, did not argue. There is still work here, he admitted. There are still monsters who did not learn the lesson. But there are monsters at home too, and Stephen is not wrong. We have been away a long time. Marc listened to both of them, and to the third voice that was his own, and he did not answer any of them yet. Selene found him on the roof an hour before the portal was to open. She did not ask what he had decided. She asked, instead, a different question. If you stay, she said, will it be because we need you, or because you are afraid of what happens if we do not? Marc turned to her slowly. It was, he realized, the question he had not yet had the courage to ask himself. Peace cannot rest on one warrior, Selene said. If it does, it is not peace. It is a leash. You gave us the beginning. We must be the ones who continue it, or it will mean nothing. She paused. And you, Moon Knight, you have your own world. You have your own wound. You should go home and finish healing it. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought of Layla, who did not yet know where he had been. He thought of the small apartment above the fish and chip shop. He thought of Gotham's skylines he had not seen in what felt like a lifetime. He thought of Khonshu, tall behind him now, waiting without pressing. I trusted no one for a long time, Marc said quietly. Even inside my own skull, I did not trust the ones who lived there with me. If I stay here, it will be because I do not believe you can do this without me. And that would be an insult to everything we just built. Selene smiled. It was a small smile. It was the first one he had ever seen on her. Then go, she said, and take with you the knowledge that you were not needed forever, only long enough. Marc walked with her back through the city one last time. He said his goodbyes to Lucian, who bowed with a formality no Lycan had shown a stranger in 1,000 years. He said his goodbyes to the Concord in the mountains, who gave him a small silver crescent carved from stone as a keepsake. He said his goodbyes to the rooftop, where he had first understood that all three of himself were worth keeping. Then he walked, alone with his god, toward the light of the reopening moon. Months passed in the Underworld before its people began to believe that what had happened was real. The Concord in the mountains grew from a handful to 100, then to 1,000. Selene's new council, imperfect and quarrelsome, and often exhausted, held its meetings in a rebuilt hall where the seats of vampire, Lycan, and human envoys were placed at equal height around a single round table. Old habits still surfaced. Old griefs still bled. Some vampires refused every offer of coexistence and vanished into the deeper shadows. Some Lycans still tracked ancient enemies through back alleys, unable to release the taste of revenge from their teeth. But the machinery of the endless war had been broken, and no one, not even its former beneficiaries, could quite figure out how to rebuild it. Legends began. That was inevitable. Children who had not yet been born on the night of the Sovereign spoke of the White Moon Guardian who had come from another sky. Storytellers who had lost family to the old regime told his tale with reverence and, sometimes, with tears. In certain sanctuaries, small crescents of silver stone were placed above doorways as a quiet reminder that mercy had once walked here and could be summoned again if anyone bothered to try. Marc returned to his own world through a doorway of pale light that closed behind him with a sound like a held breath finally released. He arrived on a Gotham rooftop of all places, on a night when the moon was full and the city below was doing what cities do. He stood there for a long time. His body remembered how to be human here. His three selves settled, slowly, into a quieter arrangement than they had known in years. He was not healed. He would not be for a long time. But he was, he understood, less afraid of himself than he had been. Khonshu appeared beside him one last time. The god was smaller now, or perhaps only calmer. He looked out over the human city, and he spoke without demand, without command, without the old hunger. "The moon does not choose who deserves its light," Khonshu said. "It shines upon all. That is why justice must do the same. I forgot this once. You reminded me. I will try to remember longer this time." Marc did not answer. He inclined his head, and that was enough. Then Khonshu was gone, and Marc was only a man in a white cloak on a rooftop, looking down at a city that did not know where he had been. Far away, in a universe that had once been ruled by night, a young vampire crouched in an alley with a starving human girl at his mercy. He was hungry. He was frightened. He had been taught, all his short life, that this was the correct way of things. He looked at her. She looked at him. He remembered, though he did not know why, a story his mother had told him about a white ghost with crescent blades who had once said that monsters were not born but made. He remembered the small silver crescent above the doorway of the shelter where his mother now worked. He remembered that he had a choice, that he had always had a choice, that every night of his long life to come would be built out of choices like this one. He stepped back. He let the girl go. Somewhere far above, in a sky he could not see, a moon he did not worship shone down on him anyway, indifferent and generous and old, and Marc Spector's greatest victory continued its quiet, patient work across a world he would never see again.